Yo, what's up? It's Risco. In today's video, we're going to be breaking down some TEAROUT. Alright, so as always, let's start with the drums real quick. I used a cymatics kick. So on this kick, I just removed a little bit of the low mid because I don't want it to mess with the rest of the elements, like the gun bass, for example. So I lowered a little bit on the mids. The snare I used is from this EDM template sample pack. Then I used a Kashmir China sample. I used another Kashmir sample for a crash. And then I used, again, another Kashmir sample for a short sweep in between, like silence section of the drop. And they all sound like this together. So I feel like the real important stuff here is to have a really big snare and adding the China sample, because China sample, they really just add a lot of power to the drums. Then for the basses, this is the gun I used. So to create a gun like this, you need three elements. You need a tonal layer, a transient layer, and a sub bass. So I made all of this using this little part at the bottom of my project file. So the sub here is just a basic shape, a sine wave, and I added a little bit of harmonics to it just to have it more distorted sounding. I added tube distortion, and then I created this short envelope that I put on the coarse pitch at 19, and this is what's giving the transient to the sub bass. And then with LFO2, I just modulate the level and the noise oscillator. And then in post-processing, I added this EQ where I just create a huge notch in the mids, and I boosted a lot the low end and a little bit on the high end. And after that, I added the saturator at 1 dB with the soft clip on. And then in Ableton, when you freeze a MIDI track, you can then copy paste it into an audio file directly, so you don't have to resample. It's really easy. So that's what I did for the sub bass. It's right here. And then I created the tonal layer. To do this, I use another Serum. The bass without any post-processing is just a scout wavetable from the spectral section with 16 voices unison, and the detune is almost all the way down. The modulation is on 8 notes on the level, on the high notch filter like this, and without any effects, this is how the bass sounds. So as you can hear, it's just a really short punch, basically. And then to this, I added hyperdimension, diode 1 distortion with the modulation on the mix. Then I added this multiband compressor. And then the real tonality of this sound comes with the reverb filter and this modulation on the cutoff. So a sound like this is really useful because then we're going to resample and we're going to put a ton of effects on it. And that's what's going to create the gun with the sub layer and the percussion for the transient layer. And we're going to get a really heavy gun. So I resampled this one, same thing, I froze it, and then I copy pasted it into an audio track. And now I have this sound. And then to this sound, I started by adding an OTT with the output up, time up, and amount down. Some reverb. Then I added this shifter on the frequency mode at minus 100 Hz. Then I put the kilohertz transient shaper just to give it more attack and more pump with the clip activated. And then some EQ to remove some of the annoying frequencies and boost a little bit the mids and the highs. Another reverb. A saturator with the drive at 4.5 dB. The soft clip is on and the output is down. And then another shifter, same thing on frequency mode, and I put it minus 35 Hz. Now, if you add this sound to the sub layer, you get something like this. And then to have a little bit more transient, I added this short percussion from the Kashmir sample pack. And to this I added a transient shaper, same thing, give it more attack and more pump. An OTT, a reverb, a shifter to give it more tonality, an EQ, and a saturator to make it louder. And now all together you get something like this. And then I resampled all these 3 layers into one layer, which is the gun bass. Then I took this bass and then I put it in the main audio track for the gun bass, and I added my gun rack. So the first thing I have in this gun rack is this EQ where I'm cutting out the low end because I want to use a separate sub. Then I have this OTT with the output up. Time is almost 1000% and the amount is 30%. Then I added this EQ where I cut out a little bit on the mids. Then I have this saturator with the drive at 2.29 dB. Then I have this EQ where I'm just shaping a little bit more the sound. This compressor with the makeup at 3.5 dB. Another OTT. Another EQ to clean up a little bit more the sound. And then I have this kilohertz frequency shifter that I'm going to be using for automation to create variation in the drop. And then I have this saturator with a little bit more drive and the soft clip is on. Then I have another EQ to clean up the sound a little more. And then I have another kilohertz transient shaper to give it a little bit more attack and the clip is activated. And then I have this EQ that I'm just using at the beginning of the drop just to make it sound like a radio effect a little bit. And I'm deactivating it as soon as the drop hits. And then I have this reverb only for transition purposes. So now this is how the gun sounds before the gun rack. And this is how it sounds after. And then the next really important element is the sub bass. So sub bass is really simple. I'm using a sine wave with a little bit more harmonics. There's this LFO on the coarse pitch again to create this attack. And then this bass is going through some EQing and saturation. The Reason Rack plugin here is distortion, but I'm not using it in this case. So it's going through EQ, saturation, and just kind of mix it up with the gun so that it works well together. Now, if you want to go even more crazy, you can add a Screech Bass, and that's what I did. So I'm going to show you right now how to make it. So once again, I'm using Serum. I'm using the init wavetable, the saw wave, at -2 octave. And I'm modulating this wavetable by another saw wave using the FM. I put this LFO on the FM on the level, and the second wavetable has a sync going up. So without any effects, this is how it sounds. In Ableton, I also have this automation for the pitch that's going from the bottom to the top and then going back to the middle with a window of 3 and -3 semitones. For the filter, I added a comp filter at 56 Hz and a lot of resonance. And then for the effects, I have some hyperdimension with the detune all the way up and the mix at 21%. The dimension size is at 0 and the mix at 35%. This is helping making it a lot wider in the speakers. Then I added a tube distortion, a chorus, a multiband, and then this EQ that's just acting like a low pass filter. And then in post-processing, I have this OTT. Same thing again, output is up, time is up, amount is down. I have this auto pan going at a rate of 12 Hz. And then I have this EQ just to cut out the low end and shape a little bit the sound in the high ends. Then I added the saturator at 2.8 dB, soft clip is on, and then a reverb to make it a little bit wider. So these are the three main elements of the drop: the gun bass, the sub bass, and the screech bass. And then for the rest, it's just about supporting layers. The first thing I have is this little hyper bass doing this melody on top of the drop. And then it switches throughout the drop to something like this. And then something like this. And at the end. So how I made this sound is very easy. Again, I have two saw wave at 16 voices unison with detune all the way up for both of them. The first one is at +2 octave and the other one is at +1. I'm using a high 6 filter on both oscillators, and I'm using hyperdimension and compression just to make it louder and wider in the speakers. And then the last layer I have is this tension layer that I made. So my drop is in D sharp minor. I put a long note on D sharp and another one straight on E, and this creates a lot of tension. And the patch itself is just 2 digital wavetables, a lot of detune, a comms filter, a really fast modulation on the bend minus here and the PWM here. And once again, I used hyperdimension to make it wider in the speaker and the multiband compressor. And then in post-processing, just some reverb to help it make it even wider. And when you're making a sound like this, you have to remember to cut the low end on the sides as well, because we're making it so wide in the speakers when we use a lot of voices, a lot of detune, a lot of hyper, some reverb also. So if you forget to cut the low end on the sides of the sound, it's gonna make all your drop really messy and muddy. So this is something you should keep in mind. And yeah, that's basically it, guys. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked it and I hope you learned something. If you did, please leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel to not miss any of the future videos. Thank you again, and I'll see you guys in the next one.